Hey guys, tonight we dive into the curious, crusty and quietly horrifying world of Topic. Imagine waking up before dawn, facing key shocking element, while everyone else sleeps peacefully. But don't get too comfortable yet. Things are about to get grim, messy and strangely fascinating. Before we start, hit that like button if you enjoy deep dives into bizarre histories. Subscribe for more stories you won't believe, and comment where you're tuning in from. It's always fun to see who's awake at this hour. By the end of this video, you'll know one or two shocking facts, and see the world of Topic in a way textbooks could never show. Brace yourself for adjective plus key danger or oddity. Welcome to a story of grit, danger, and bizarre survival. This is the world of Topic. It's 4 a.m. in Victorian London. The city is quiet, almost unnervingly so, except for the occasional groan of a horse pulling a cart and the faint clatter of shutters rattling against soot-stained buildings. A thin fog hangs low over cobblestone streets, curling around the lanterns like ghostly fingers. You are awake. Not because you love the dawn, not because you are an early riser. No, you are awake because you are a baker. And in this era, waking before the sun isn't a choice. It's a necessity. You rise from a straw mattress so stiff it could double as a torture device. Your muscles protest, and your lungs fill with the thick, cold air of the loft you call home. There's no coffee. No soft hum of an alarm clock, just the distant coughing of your neighbours, some of whom you suspect won't survive the week. You dress mechanically, a flour-stained apron over rough-spun clothes, worn leather shoes, and gloves that have seen better decades. Every item carries the scent of yesterday's soot, sweat, and flour dust. Descending the narrow stairwell, you step into a world that is both familiar and quietly horrifying. The bakery lies below street level, a subterranean chamber that smells of scorched dough, coal smoke, and damp wood. The light is dim. Flickering oil lamps cast shadows that dance across cracked walls. You can feel the cold seeping into your bones, mingling with the heat radiating from the brick oven. That oven isn't just an appliance, it is a living, breathing monster. The fire must roar continuously, fed by coal that blackens everything it touches. Hands crack from the cold, skin sweats from the heat, and soot finds its way into every crevice of your body. Flour, fine and unyielding, clings to your hair, your clothes, your eyelashes. You sneeze. A small cloud rises, drifting lazily across the room. The apprentice laughs nervously. You consider throwing a handful of flour at him, if only to break the monotony. Outside, London is stirring. Fog thickens as the city awakens, yet down here in the bakery, it is a world apart, a pit of heat, grime, and relentless expectation. The streets may teem with horse-drawn carriages, pedestrians, and the occasional shouting street vendor, but you are focused on the ritual that defines your existence. The bread, every loaf, every roll is a silent gamble with your health and your life. In this world, routine is survival. Lighting the oven requires skill, courage, and fingers you are willing to sacrifice. Coal embers hiss and spark. Misstep and your skin becomes part of the bread-making process in a way you did not intend. The sound of the fire, a low, constant roar, is punctuated by occasional cracks and pops, the oven reminding you that it could erupt at any second. Yet, you soldier on. Because if the bread does not rise, neither do you. The bakery is not merely a workplace. It is a universe unto itself. Every object has personality. The troughs of dough swell like living beasts, sticky and unyielding. The walls, thick with soot and grease, seem to lean in, closing the space around you. Rats, bold and unnervingly clever, scurry along shelves and skitter behind sacks of flour. You almost forget they are pests. They are more like tiny, furry co-workers, competing for crumbs and occasionally paying the price. Your fellow bakers are a motley crew of grim faces, sweating through shirts or working shirtless because the heat is unbearable. Skin sores and burns are badges of honor. Apprentices, barely in their teens, haul 80-pound sacks of flour with trembling arms, learning that mistakes are punished with exhaustion, shouting, or humiliation. It is a place where failure has consequences far graver than a burned loaf. Every element of your environment conspires against you. Coal smoke fills your lungs. Fine flour settles in every fold of skin. The air tastes dry, bitter, and gritty. A constant reminder that your body is part of the industrial machinery that turns raw ingredients into daily sustenance. Water is scarce and often tainted. Flour is adulterated. And every batch carries a hint of danger, from the hidden rat droppings to the potential poisons accidentally mixed in. Yet there is routine in this chaos. You measure, sift, mix, and knead almost ritualistically, each motion precise and exhausting. The apprentices watch, learn, and occasionally stumble, adding tension to every motion. The oven looms like a dormant dragon, demanding constant attention. Its roar fills the room, harmonizing with the creaks of floorboards, the hiss of coal, and the low mutters of bakers trying to maintain sanity. Through all this, you navigate not just the physical hazards, but the social hierarchy. The master baker demands perfection, apprentices fear retribution, and customers outside wait for bread that may be both nourishment and hazard. Every loaf carries risk. Some might contain chalk, alum, or contaminated water. Some might harbour an unnoticed rat hair or the bitter tang of coal soot. You know these dangers, yet you proceed, because in Victorian London, survival means baking at all costs. Even small details become epic in this environment. A spill of flour on the floor is a potential disaster. A mismanaged ember could ignite the wooden beams above. Rats slipping into dough troughs are shrugged off as inevitable. The bakery is a microcosm of danger, a theatre of dark absurdity, where every day is a dance with fire, pests, and exhaustion. By the time dawn truly breaks, the streets outside fill with light and life. But inside the bakery, the battle is only beginning. Heat, smoke, flour, and grime form a relentless cycle, one that tests the body, patience, and sanity of everyone within. Yet there is purpose, even in suffering. Bread must rise. Customers must be fed, and you, though weary, scorched, and coughing, must endure. And so the stage is set. This is not a cozy kitchen. This is a furnace, a battlefield, a test of endurance, and you are the protagonist of this grim, crusty world. The ovens await, the flour waits, the rats wait. And your next move, one wrong step, one burnt loaf, one spark too many, could tip the balance between survival and disaster. The day officially begins when the first bell of the street vendor rings, but in reality, it started hours ago when your lungs first filled with the coal smoke and flour dust of the pre-dawn hours. By now, the oven is a furnace roaring with hungry fire. The dough troughs are rising monsters, and every surface is slick with sweat, soot, or flour. You breathe through the chaos, each inhalation a gamble between survival and suffocation. Your first task is simple in theory, but torturous in execution. Kneading. Flour-covered hands slam into sticky, resistant dough, pushing, folding, and turning until it becomes supple, or until your arms scream enough to demand mutiny. Apprentices fumble nearby, adding more flour than needed, creating clouds of white dust that coat everything. The air tastes like grit and despair. You wonder how anyone survives a week in this environment, let alone a lifetime. The coal fire is a constant companion. Too little heat and the bread will fail. Too much, and the oven becomes a dragon, threatening to scorch your skin and ignite the wooden beams above. Every ember must be placed precisely. Every scoop of coal is a negotiation with the oven, an unspoken understanding that it will give only what you take. No more, no less. The hazards multiply when you consider water and ingredients. The water is often grey with sediment. The flour is adulterated, laced with chalk, alum, or worse. Yeast is unpredictable, and the arsenic-laced sweeteners of the era, those are a quiet joke, whispered in fearful tones by bakers who have seen apprentices faint after tasting just a pinch too much. You weigh, measure, and mix, knowing that a small misstep can ruin the loaf or the baker. As you shape each loaf, the apprentices observe, hands trembling, eyes wide. Every mistake is a lesson learned through humiliation and occasionally pain. A slipping hand can send dough smashing to the floor or trigger the master baker's wrath. The room is alive with motion. Flour clouds swirl, ovens hiss, and the rhythmic slaps of dough echo like war drums. Even the rats have learned the rhythm. They weave between your ankles, dash over the counters, and occasionally disappear into the troughs. One apprentice screams as a rat vanishes into the rising dough. You mutter darkly, "Congratulations, you survived your first rat incident. Wear it proudly." The apprentices are learning that survival here is as much about endurance and nerve as it is about skill. Escalating hazards. By mid-morning, your body aches in places you didn't know could ache. Sweat drips into your eyes, mixes with soot, and stings like punishment. Burns from the oven create little hot reminders of your mortality, and the constant bending and lifting strain your back and knees. Every loaf is a physical challenge, each movement choreographed to prevent disaster, but disasters still happen. Fire hazards are omnipresent. Sparks leap from the oven, threatening the hanging sacks of flour or the wooden beams. One misstep, one stray ember, and the bakery could transform into an inferno in seconds. Smoke fills the room, blinding and choking you, while apprentices cough and stagger, unsure whether to help or flee. You grin darkly. This is the baptism of every Victorian baker. Then there's hygiene, or the lack thereof. Sweat, coal dust and flour mix with the grime of previous days. Water is scarce and washing hands is a luxury. Every cut, scrape or burn becomes a potential infection waiting to happen. Rats, ever present and fearless, add to the risk, nibbling near open wounds and contaminating surfaces. Yet, in this chaos, the bakers continue. The city outside relies on them. Hunger will not wait. You glance at the clock. Noon. By now, you've lifted hundreds of pounds of flour, managed the oven like a beast tamer, and survived minor fires and rat attacks. And yet the work never ceases. Bread must be baked, roll-shaped, ovens stoked, and every batch delivered on time. Fatigue is a constant companion, pressing down on your shoulders, clawing at your eyelids. You push through because there is no alternative. The apprentices learn the hard way. Failure has consequences. Burn a batch of bread and you spend hours cleaning the ovens. Miscalculate the coal, and the master baker's wrath will descend. A verbal tirade as harsh as the oven itself. This is training through fire, literally. Survival is about more than skill. It is about resilience, nerve, and a touch of luck. By afternoon, minor injuries accumulate. Cuts, burns, bruises, rashes. The air is a thick mix of smoke and flour, making breathing an ordeal. Yet there is rhythm, a method in madness. The bakers work like clockwork, the apprentices mimicking every motion, every gesture. Each loaf is a small victory, each completed batch a testament to endurance. As the day wanes, dangers escalate. Fires, collapsing sacks, overheated ovens, and exhausted apprentices all threaten disaster. You navigate the hazards with a practiced eye, but each day is a gamble. Even experienced bakers fall victim to the relentless pace, the constant heat, and the omnipresent smoke. Survival is measured not in skill alone, but in stamina and caution. By evening, the bakery is a battlefield of flour dust, soot, sweat, and scorched bread. The apprentices, if still standing, are coated in grime and fatigue. The ovens hiss, the rats scurry, and you, survivor of another day, survey the chaos with grim satisfaction. You've endured, but the hazards remain. Tomorrow will be the same, only worse, because the rhythm never ceases, and the world outside demands bread at all costs. Morning grind and physical strain. The first light of dawn barely pierces the soot-stained windows of the Victorian bakery, yet inside, the air is already thick with anticipation, flour dust, and the acrid smell of coal smoke. Every breath tastes of grit, heat, and the faint tang of souring yeast. For the apprentices, this is not just a workspace. It is a proving ground, a place where endurance, precision, and nerve are tested relentlessly from the very first minute. The day begins with kneading. At first glance, it seems a simple task, almost meditative in theory. In practice, it is a relentless, punishing rhythm of pressing, folding, and slamming dough that resists like a living creature. Each motion demands strength, coordination, and a tolerance for discomfort. Hands stick, wrists ache, and shoulders protest, yet stopping is impossible. The dough must obey, and so must you. Apprentices fumble nearby, sending clouds of white flour into the air. The dust settles into every crease of skin, every strand of hair, and worst of all, every breath. The lungs are assaulted, the throat scratches, but the work continues. Stopping is weakness, and weakness is not tolerated here. The ovens roar to life, threatening yet familiar. Each furnace is a monster in its own right. Too cool, and the bread will be condemned. Too hot, and flames will lick dangerously close to wooden beams. Coal must be shoveled with care, every ember precisely positioned. One misstep, one stray spark, and disaster is inevitable. Fingers are burned, eyebrows singed, and occasional sparks ignite small fires that are doused only after panic and shouts. Apprentices learn quickly. Vigilance is survival, hesitation is injury. Then come the ingredients, each presenting its own challenge. Flour is inconsistent, sometimes mixed with chalk or alum to stretch the supply. Water is murky, occasionally laced with impurities. Yeast unpredictable, and sweeteners occasionally contain hidden arsenic. Every measurement is a negotiation with fate, requiring careful attention and constant supervision. One slip, a mismeasured teaspoon or a dropped scoop, and the consequences could be immediate, ranging from ruined batches to long-term illness. Apprentices watch, wide-eyed and trembling, absorbing the rhythm of controlled chaos. Rats are omnipresent, more clever than the apprentices and far braver. They scuttle across counters, dart into troughs, and occasionally emerge to steal crumbs while the baker's attention is diverted. A shriek of surprise from a novice often echoes through the room, followed by muttered sarcasm from the veterans. Well done, you survived your first rat encounter. Wear it proudly. The rodents are both nuisance and teacher, highlighting the relentless danger that exists beyond human error. Physical strain is constant. Every movement, from lifting sacks of flour to pulling hot trays from ovens, demands muscle, balance, and nerve. Sweat mingles with soot and flour to form a gritty paste on skin. Every joint complains, every finger stiffens, yet the rhythm of work cannot be paused. Knead, shape, bake, repeat, the cycle is endless. Fatigue creeps steadily, threatening to slow the hands that must remain precise. Yet stopping is impossible. The oven waits for no one. The master baker observes silently, eyes sharp, ready to intervene with either correction or scolding. Apprentices learn quickly. Mistakes are costly. A burned loaf results in long hours of cleaning and extra labor. A poorly kneaded batch might earn a lecture or a small punishment. There is no room for error in this carefully orchestrated chaos, yet humor persists in small, grim ways. Jokes about crushed fingers or singed eyebrows circulate quietly, a dark camaraderie forming among those who endure the workday together. Morning progresses, and the bakery transforms into a symphony of chaos. Rolling pins smack dough with rhythmic precision, ovens hiss and roar, and apprentices scurry between stations like small coordinated soldiers. Every tray removed from the oven brings a mixture of relief and new responsibility. Bread must cool, inspect, and package with care. One misstep, one bump, and the fragile loaves could collapse or crack. A small tragedy repeated dozens of times each morning. Sweat drips into eyes, stinging and blinding. Dust coats every surface, clings to clothing, and forms a thin film on skin that is impossible to wash away until the day ends. The air is thick, hot, and oppressive, and every breath requires effort. Yet in this relentless environment, lessons are learned quickly. Endurance, vigilance, and precise timing are everything. Apprentices adapt or fall behind, learning that survival depends as much on cunning and observation as on strength. By mid-morning, the physical toll is undeniable. Shoulders ache, fingers swell, backs groan, and knees buckle under constant strain. Minor injuries accumulate, small cuts, burns, abrasions, all accepted as part of the ritual. Sweat, soot, and flour mix into an inseparable grime. The apprentices, once hopeful, now move with the practiced precision of those hardened by early hardship. The bakery is no longer a place of novelty or wonder. It is a battlefield, each task a skirmish with the elements, the dough, the ovens, and the inevitable fatigue. Despite these conditions, the work continues unbroken. Each loaf is both a small triumph and a reminder of the relentless cycle that defines the day. The rhythm persists, knead, shape, bake, repeat. Apprentices learn the poetry in exhaustion, the precision in chaos, and the grim humor that sustains those who endure. Rats continue their stealthy movements, ovens roar, and flour clouds swirl through shafts of sunlight. The dance of survival is ongoing, a brutal yet strangely satisfying routine that tests every nerve and muscle, shaping young bakers into survivors of a world that respects neither weakness nor hesitation. By the end of this morning, the apprentices are physically drained, mentally sharper, and acutely aware of the stakes. The bakery is a crucible, forging endurance, skill, and a dark, practical humor in equal measure. They pause briefly, inhaling the mix of smoke, flour, and triumph, knowing that rest is fleeting and that the afternoon will bring its own set of challenges. Yet for now, the first battle of the day is survived, and with it, the first lesson is learned. In this bakery, survival demands strength, vigilance, and relentless, precise effort. The afternoon sun barely reaches the heart of the bakery, blocked by layers of grime and soot. Yet the heat inside is relentless. Every inch of space is filled with activity. Apprentices rushing to refill coal, check dough, or lift trays of baking bread. The physical toll escalates as fatigue sets in, muscles quivering, sweat dripping into eyes, and hands trembling from hours of repetitive strain. It is a battlefield, and the slightest lapse can result in disaster. Ovens, monstrous and unpredictable, remain a constant threat. Flames dance dangerously close to wooden beams, sparks fly unexpectedly, and the heat radiates mercilessly. Apprentices learn to approach with caution, respecting the ovens as living entities, capricious, powerful, and unforgiving. One wrong move, a misjudged tray, and the consequences are immediate. Burns, smoldering wood, or ruined bread. The oven is both teacher and tormentor, a demanding master that tests nerves as much as strength. Scalding water and boiling liquids compound the danger. Mixers, kettles, and trays of hot ingredients are handled with care, yet accidents happen frequently. Splashes cause burns, steam clouds scald faces, and slippery floors lead to sudden falls. The apprentices develop a keen awareness, moving with calculated precision, yet the unexpected lurks at every corner. Each hazard teaches a hard lesson in vigilance and foresight, forging skills born from necessity and survival. The air is thick with flour dust, soot, and occasional smoke from coal fires. Lungs protest, coughing erupts, and breathing becomes laborious. Those with weaker constitutions falter, chests tight, eyes watering, while the hardened apprentices adapt, their lungs growing accustomed to the assault. Every breath is a compromise between necessity and pain. Respiratory strain becomes part of the routine, a silent partner in the relentless workday. Noise adds another layer of chaos. Rolling pins strike dough, trays clang, ovens roar, and shouts of instruction cut through the din. The cacophony is exhausting, yet it becomes the rhythm of survival. Apprentices communicate with gestures, shouts, and shorthand, developing an unspoken code that ensures efficiency despite the chaos. Over time, the noise fades into background, replaced by a focused awareness of movement, timing, and the constant threats surrounding them. Fatigue reaches its peak as the afternoon stretches on. Arms shake, backs ache, and vision blurs slightly from the combination of heat, dust, and exhaustion. Yet stopping is never an option. Bread must be baked, trays moved, and mistakes avoided. Apprentices push through pain, relying on habit, endurance, and grim humor to maintain pace. Jokes about singed fingers or crushed toes circulate quietly, easing tension and reinforcing camaraderie. Humor becomes a survival tool, a shield against the relentless pressure and constant hazards. The masters watch with hawk-like scrutiny. Errors are not tolerated, and discipline is strict. A poorly shaped loaf, a tray dropped, or a mismanaged oven results in scolding, extra labor, or occasionally physical reprimand. Apprentices learn quickly. Vigilance is survival, mistakes are costly, and endurance is the currency of this world. Each correction reinforces the lessons embedded in the morning's grind, further hardening young bakers against the relentless demands of the bakery. Hygiene is often overlooked in the chaos, adding another layer of danger. Rats scurry across counters, crumbs litter every surface, and spoiled ingredients hide in corners. Apprentices develop an uneasy tolerance for pests and filth, learning to work around them while minimizing contamination. The coexistence with vermin teaches resourcefulness and awareness, traits that are as essential as strength or skill in surviving the day. Injuries are inevitable. Small cuts, burns, and bruises accumulate, yet the work continues unabated. Bandages are applied hastily, ice is a luxury rarely afforded, and pain is internalized. Apprentices develop a stoic endurance, learning to move despite discomfort, to act precisely despite swelling or soreness, and to maintain focus under duress. Pain becomes routine, fatigue a constant companion, and vigilance the only protection against worsening conditions. By late afternoon, the bakery hums with both exhaustion and efficiency. Each apprentice has endured countless hazards, from scalding water to flying flour, from unpredictable ovens to nimble rats. They move with a practiced precision, muscles aching, lungs burning, yet eyes sharp and hands steady. Survival is no longer an abstract concept. It is a daily achievement, measured in each loaf saved, each burn avoided, each tray successfully delivered. The rhythm begins to slow as the day nears its end, yet the lessons remain. Hazards have been confronted, endurance tested, and skills sharpened. Apprentices have learned to balance vigilance with efficiency, strength with precision, and humor with grim reality. The bakery is a crucible, forging resilience in those who endure, teaching that survival depends not just on physical strength, but on awareness, adaptability, and the willingness to confront danger head-on. As the last trays are removed and the ovens cool, a moment of quiet settles over the bakery. Dust hangs in the fading light, sweat and soot coat every surface, and the air smells of flour, coal, and triumph. Apprentices, physically drained yet mentally sharper, reflect briefly on the day's struggles. They have survived, learned, and adapted. The daily grind, the hazards, and the exhaustion have left their marks. Yet each mark is a testament to endurance, skill, and the unyielding spirit required to survive the Victorian bakery. The clatter of metal and the sharp scent of raw ingredients greet apprentices as they enter the bakery each morning. Flour, sugar, yeast, simple components of bread, mask an undercurrent of danger, a subtle peril that is invisible yet ever present. Among these seemingly harmless substances lurk hazards that can maim, sicken, or even kill. Victorian bakers worked with tools and ingredients that modern eyes would consider barbaric, and understanding their lethal potential is essential to grasping the daily reality of this world. Alum, a white crystalline powder, is introduced as a dough conditioner. It promises lighter, fluffier bread, but the margin between useful and deadly is perilously thin. Miscalculation is catastrophic. Apprentices measure meticulously, yet errors are inevitable. Alum causes digestive distress, kidney issues, and in high doses, death. Despite warnings, its use is widespread. Bakers pursue profit and efficiency over safety. The apprentice's hand shakes slightly as he measures, aware that a simple misstep could have lasting consequences. Arsenic, perhaps the most notorious additive, lurks in food as an invisible threat. It is introduced in small doses to enhance color or imitate costly ingredients. The apprentice is taught to respect it, to handle it like fire, useful, dangerous, and unforgiving. Arsenic poisoning creeps slowly, symptoms subtle at first, fatigue, nausea, fainting spells. Only later does the full horror emerge. A single grain, misapplied, can be fatal, and yet apprentices handle it daily, under watchful eyes, relying on precision, instinct, and strict routines to prevent disaster. Vinegar, saltpeter, and other chemical additives contribute to the complex tapestry of flavors, but they also carry hazards. Saltpeter, used for leavening, can burn skin or inflame eyes if mishandled. Vinegar, acidic and pungent, scalds hands and irritates respiratory passages when spilled. Each ingredient demands careful respect, and each misstep carries a tangible threat. Apprentices learn early. Mastery of ingredients is not only about taste, it is about survival. Tools are no less dangerous than the substances they manipulate. Long-handled peelers, metal cutters, and sharp knives are standard equipment, yet accidents are routine. A moment's inattention can slice a fingertip or draw blood in a flash. The apprentice's fingers develop calluses, yet these small shields are not enough to prevent the occasional cut. Bandages are applied hurriedly, pain suppressed, work resumed without pause. Mistakes are not merely inconveniences. They are a stark reminder of mortality in the baking world. Heavy mixers and grinders represent a different kind of hazard. Metal teeth, rotating rapidly, can catch a sleeve, a strand of hair, or a hand. Apprentices watch each other constantly, ensuring no one ventures too close without caution. Even experienced bakers maintain vigilance. Complacency is a luxury that can be fatal. The machinery hums, a persistent background menace, reminding every worker that a single lapse can transform routine labor into catastrophe. Fire remains a constant companion. Open flames, coal ovens, and hot surfaces combine to create a lethal environment. Wooden trays, dust-laden surfaces, and flammable clothing magnify the danger. Sparks leap unpredictably, and the apprentice's reflexes must be sharp and instinctive. Heat is relentless, searing skin, bending tools, and testing endurance. Each flame is both servant and predator, offering warmth for baking but threatening disaster with equal enthusiasm. Glass and ceramic containers hold liquids and chemicals, yet they too are precarious. Slips and spills are common. Broken shards cut hands, and spilled chemicals react unpredictably. Apprentices learn to balance containers carefully, distribute weight evenly, and anticipate accidents before they occur. These lessons are learned through trial, error, and occasional injury, an unspoken curriculum of pain and vigilance. The combination of ingredients and tools creates an environment of constant negotiation. The apprentice must think 3 steps ahead. The flour can ignite in a sudden spark, the knife can slip on a wet surface, the coal oven can flare unexpectedly. Every action carries consequences. Mistakes are measured not just in ruined bread, but in blood, pain, and sometimes irreversible injury. This heightened awareness becomes second nature, embedded in posture, movement, and instinct. Preparation and storage of ingredients is equally hazardous. Flour sacks, stacked high, can topple, crushing limbs or causing suffocation. Heavy bags of sugar and grain require careful coordination to move safely. Improperly stored chemicals can leak or react, contaminating food or causing burns. Apprentices navigate these perils daily, learning to respect weight, balance, and chemical properties in a manner that blends practical skill with a constant awareness of danger. Despite these hazards, apprentices are expected to work efficiently and maintain high standards of production. Errors in measurement or handling are unforgivable, as they can compromise the entire batch of bread or, worse, endanger lives. The tension between speed and caution defines every movement. Apprentices adapt, developing mental checklists, instinctive corrections, and a rhythm that allows them to survive and even thrive amidst constant peril. By late morning, the cumulative effects of exposure, heat, dust, and stress become tangible. Hands ache, lungs burn, and nerves fray, yet mastery grows in parallel with suffering. Each successfully handled ingredient, each carefully operated tool, and each minor disaster averted reinforces competence and builds resilience. Survival is both a physical and psychological achievement, an endurance test that forges discipline, alertness, and an intimate understanding of danger in its myriad forms. While Part 1 explored the everyday hazards of ingredients and tools, Part 2 dives into the more advanced dangers, accidents, chemical reactions, and historical mishaps that shaped baking practices. Apprentices learn that danger is not always visible. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, a slow-moving threat that accumulates silently. One of the most infamous risks came from improperly mixed dough. Heavy, unbalanced, or overworked dough could behave unpredictably. Apprentices recall instances of dough rebelling, expanding too quickly or collapsing, causing burns, contusions, or even suffocation if caught under a massive slab. Metal peels, wooden boards, and stone counters could exacerbate injuries when dough shifted unexpectedly. Mistakes were not just theoretical. They left apprentices with lasting scars and fearful respect for even the simplest task. Chemical reactions among ingredients were another hidden danger. Alum interacting with acidic substances could release fumes that irritated eyes and lungs. Spilled vinegar onto a concentrated arsenic solution could produce toxic vapors. Apprentices were trained to recognize subtle signs, changes in color, smell, or texture. Failure to respond quickly often resulted in widespread contamination, affecting multiple batches of bread and endangering anyone nearby. These lessons were learned painfully, often at the expense of minor burns or nausea. Fire-related accidents escalated when multiple hazards combined. Flour dust, ubiquitous in the bakery, is highly combustible. A stray spark from a coal oven or friction from metal tools could ignite clouds of airborne flour. The resulting explosion is small but intense, capable of knocking apprentices off their feet and leaving burns, scarring, or concussive injuries. Historical accounts describe entire bakery rooms temporarily engulfed in white, choking clouds, a terrifying spectacle and a harsh reminder of vigilance's importance. Water and steam, omnipresent in Victorian baking, pose subtler threats. Spilled water on a hot oven surface could create scalding steam, leaving painful burns. Wet floors contributed to slips, falls, and collisions with sharp tools or hot surfaces. Apprentices moved cautiously, aware that every step carried potential consequences. Coordination and situational awareness were honed to near perfection. Life in the bakery demanded both mental and physical acuity. Historical mishaps provide sobering context. In one documented case, mismeasured alum led to the poisoning of several dozen loaves, resulting in widespread illness. In another, an inexperienced apprentice mishandled arsenic, contaminating an entire batch intended for a prominent household. These incidents illustrate the razor-thin line between routine production and disaster. Every apprentice was indoctrinated with these cautionary tales, a blend of horror story and training manual, designed to instill fear, respect, and diligence. Tools themselves could become agents of chaos when paired with human error. Knives left improperly sheathed, mixers running unattended, or neglected ovens turned everyday instruments into lethal devices. Apprentices learned through repeated exposure to near misses, a dropped knife narrowly missing a foot, a mixer catching a sleeve but sparing a hand, a hot tray scorched against a wooden board. These incidents reinforced respect for rules, routines, and teamwork, emphasizing that survival depended on constant vigilance and adherence to protocol. Dust and particulates were constant, silent threats. Flour, sugar, and powdered additives infiltrated lungs over time. Chronic respiratory conditions were common, often irreversible. Apprentices coughed, wheezed, and carried the cumulative consequences of years of exposure, all while performing tasks demanding concentration and precision. Protective measures were minimal by modern standards. Simple masks or damp cloths, barely enough to mitigate inhalation. The apprenticeship was, in many ways, a trial of endurance against environmental hazards. Even seemingly mundane actions, lifting sacks of grain, moving trays, pouring liquids, could escalate into emergencies if performed carelessly. Each apprentice learned that small errors could multiply rapidly, creating cascading dangers. Cooperation became a survival skill. A misstep by one could injure many. Teamwork, communication, and anticipatory thinking were not just beneficial, they were essential. Those who failed to internalize these lessons quickly became cautionary examples. Despite relentless danger, apprentices developed a paradoxical familiarity with risk. Each narrowly avoided accident, each successfully managed hazard, contributed to a growing expertise. They understood the rules of engagement with both ingredients and tools, respect the materials, anticipate reactions, follow protocols, and never underestimate the smallest oversight. Mastery of these lessons distinguished successful bakers from those who succumbed to misfortune. The apprenticeship, therefore, was both practical and psychological training. Apprentices emerged with an intimate knowledge of toxicology, chemistry, physics, and human error, all applied within a confined, high-pressure environment. Their education extended beyond bread. It encompassed survival, risk assessment, and crisis management, albeit in a world far harsher than contemporary kitchens. By the end of Part 2, the apprentice not only knows the mechanical and chemical properties of their environment, but has internalized the invisible currents of danger that define the bakery. Mastery is inseparable from vigilance, and skill is inseparable from experience in facing daily hazards. The world of Victorian baking, as dangerous as it is fascinating, is thus rendered tangible. A domain where ingredients are weapons, tools are potential threats, and survival depends on constant alertness. By the time apprentices reached the midpoint of their training, danger had ceased to be occasional. It had become a constant, lurking presence. The bakery, once imagined as a simple domain of flour sacks and warm ovens, revealed itself to be a labyrinth of unpredictable hazards. Every corner hid potential calamity, and every seemingly mundane task carried the weight of risk. The floor alone was treacherous. Damp patches, puddles of spilled water or milk, and stray lumps of dough created slip hazards that could send even the most careful apprentice sprawling into the path of scalding liquids or sharp tools. One misstep could lead to a domino effect. Trays of hot loaves toppled, knives slid off counters, and apprentices collided, amplifying the chaos. Early lessons in the bakery were brutal. Apprentices learned that a minor distraction, even for a single second, could cascade into a serious injury. Fire was ever present, lurking behind every oven door and glowing ember. The mixture of coal, wood, and residual flour dust made small sparks potentially deadly. Flour clouds, fine and almost invisible, were like hidden tinder waiting to ignite. A momentary gust of wind, a careless shake of a tray, or a sudden sneeze could set off an explosion of fire and smoke. Apprentices memorized the positions of sand buckets, fire blankets, and water pails, yet they knew that in a real emergency, reaction times were often too slow to prevent injury. The smell of smoke became an unnerving companion, signaling danger before the eyes could even see it. Chemical hazards added an even more insidious layer. Alum, arsenic, and other toxic substances were handled with caution, but accidents were inevitable. Misreading a recipe or misjudging the amount of a poisonous additive could produce fumes that burned eyes and lungs, or worse, contaminate entire batches. Apprentices quickly developed an almost instinctual awareness of subtle changes in color, smell, and texture, as these small cues often indicated danger. Mistakes were not just costly, they could be fatal. Structural and physical hazards compounded the risk. Overloaded shelves bowed under the weight of sacks of flour. Leaning ladders wobbled precariously. Hooks rusted and snapped without warning. Apprentices learned to constantly scan their surroundings, anticipating hazards that could strike without warning. Tools were not merely instruments of work. They were potential weapons if dropped or misused. Spatial awareness became as critical as technical skill, and mistakes were met with immediate consequences. Noise was another hidden threat. The constant clatter of trays, hissing steam from ovens, and the shouts of panicked apprentices created an auditory haze. Subtle warnings, a crackling fire, the slide of a falling pan, could easily go unnoticed. Apprentices developed a conditioned vigilance, learning to tune their ears to specific sounds that indicated immediate danger. Over time, they became adept at filtering out routine noise while remaining sensitive to anomalies that signaled escalation. Hidden hazards were everywhere, often lurking in the most innocuous places. Small cracks in oven walls, loose floorboards, or lingering chemical residues could suddenly become catalysts for disaster. A moment of negligence, such as failing to inspect a tool or surface, might trigger a cascade of accidents. Apprentices were drilled to check and double-check every detail, understanding that survival depended as much on preparation as on immediate response. Interpersonal interactions added yet another layer of unpredictability. Collisions between apprentices, miscommunications during high-stress tasks, or panicked reactions could escalate minor incidents into major crises. A dropped tool could injure not just the person handling it, but anyone nearby. Apprentices were taught teamwork as a survival skill. Cooperation and clear communication were as important as mastering the craft itself. Historical records reveal the magnitude of these combined dangers. One notable account described a bakery morning in which flour explosions, chemical spills, and sudden structural collapses occurred almost simultaneously. The result was chaos, burned hands, scorched clothing, and nearly ruined batches of bread. Senior bakers recounted such events with grim amusement, using them as cautionary tales for apprentices. These incidents illustrated a simple, brutal truth. Danger in a bakery was not hypothetical. It was inevitable, cumulative, and often unpredictable. Beyond the physical, there was a psychological toll. Fatigue, heat, and relentless pressure eroded focus, making the environment even more hazardous. The constant anticipation of accidents weighed heavily on the mind. An apprentice might hesitate for a fraction of a second, and that hesitation could mean a scalded hand or a crushed foot. Training under such conditions demanded not only skill and knowledge, but psychological endurance. Survival became a balance of technical mastery and mental resilience. By the end of this stage, apprentices internalized a critical lesson. Hazards are not isolated events, they compound. A slip leads to a burn. A chemical spill triggers confusion, and a panicked reaction escalates the crisis further. Danger was woven into the fabric of daily life. Mastery required constant awareness, quick thinking, and the ability to remain calm amid escalating chaos. In this environment, the line between competence and catastrophe was narrow, and vigilance was the only reliable safeguard. As apprentices advanced deeper into their grueling days, hazards ceased to be individual incidents. They merged into cascading catastrophes. One misjudged moment could trigger multiple dangers simultaneously, turning ordinary routines into near-apocalyptic chaos. Every corner of the bakery seemed to conspire against the unwary. Ovens roared, steam hissed, tools slid, and fumes curled invisibly through the air. Awareness became a matter of life and death. The first major escalation usually came from fire and heat. A neglected ember in a corner oven could ignite a small flour cloud, sending a silent, invisible spark racing through the bakery. Flour dust accumulated over weeks, exploded in a white flash, igniting every nearby tool, apron, and surface. In mere seconds, a single spark transformed into a fiery inferno, threatening both apprentices and the precious stock of bread. Panic became contagious. Shouts echoed off soot-stained walls, and even experienced bakers found themselves scrambling to contain flames before they spread. Chemical hazards followed, often magnifying the threat of fire. Toxic powders, arsenic, alum, and other additives were sometimes airborne due to careless handling or flour explosions. A single sneeze could scatter poisonous dust into the eyes, throat, or lungs of apprentices. The symptoms ranged from irritation to collapse, leaving victims vulnerable in an already dangerous environment. In historical records, multiple apprentices would be incapacitated simultaneously, amplifying the chaos and leaving fewer hands to manage the escalating disaster. Physical collapses compounded the crisis. Overloaded shelves gave way under the weight of flour sacks, sending heavy loads crashing to the floor. Ladders, wobbly from constant use, toppled unpredictably. Panicked apprentices collided with each other, unintentionally triggering secondary hazards. Burns, cuts, and contusions became unavoidable. Even floors themselves were unreliable. Water, milk, or spilled dough transformed wooden surfaces into slick, treacherous terrain. Every step had to be calculated, yet under stress, calculation faltered. Structural hazards also escalated dramatically. Oven walls cracked, letting loose hot coals or steam. Metal hooks bent and snapped under pressure. Every failing component added to the risk of fire, chemical exposure, or blunt trauma. The sheer unpredictability of these hazards forced apprentices into a state of hypervigilance. One misstep could trigger a chain reaction that engulfed the entire bakery in chaos. Noise and confusion added to the tension. The din of crashing trays, sizzling steam, and panicked shouts created an auditory overload. Warnings could be drowned out in the cacophony. Apprentices had to distinguish the critical sounds from background chaos, an art as much as a survival tactic. Failure to notice a subtle crack in a ladder or the hissing of escaping steam could escalate minor incidents into full-scale disasters. The psychological toll peaked during such escalations. Fear, stress, and exhaustion compounded the dangers. Experienced apprentices described it as walking a tightrope over an invisible furnace. Concentration wavered under the constant barrage of hazards, and mistakes became almost inevitable. The mental pressure was relentless. Hesitation, confusion, or panic could result in injury and sometimes even death. Historical diaries recount instances where the most skilled apprentices were incapacitated, not by lack of technical ability, but by the psychological weight of relentless danger. Apprentices also learned that escalation often occurred in clusters. One fire might ignite a nearby chemical spill. A falling shelf could dislodge hot trays. A startled apprentice might bump into a pan of boiling water. The interconnected nature of dangers demanded a combination of foresight, agility, and rapid improvisation. Every action had consequences, sometimes immediate, sometimes delayed, and a single lapse could trigger cascading disasters. Mentorship and teamwork became critical. Senior bakers would direct panicked apprentices, delegating tasks to contain hazards. A well-coordinated team could prevent total catastrophe, but miscommunication could worsen the situation. Apprentices learned the importance of clear verbal cues, eye contact, and anticipating each other's movements. Survival required as much social coordination as technical skill. By the end of these escalations, the lessons were clear. The bakery was a crucible, testing not just culinary skill, but courage, foresight, and psychological resilience. Every apprentice internalized a few fundamental truths. Danger is omnipresent. Minor mistakes escalate rapidly. Awareness, preparation, and teamwork are as crucial as technical knowledge. Panic is contagious and fatal. Historical accounts suggest that such escalations directly influenced safety reforms in later centuries. Fire regulations, protective clothing, and chemical handling protocols arose not from theory, but from repeated brutal lessons in escalation. The chaos of apprentices learning through trial, error, and disaster ultimately shaped modern baking safety practices. Finally, these cumulative dangers taught apprentices an almost philosophical truth. Mastery was not about eliminating hazards. It was about surviving them, predicting their intersections, and adapting constantly. Each day presented new challenges, ensuring that complacency was impossible. Apprentices emerged hardened, alert, and deeply respectful of the fragile balance between skill and catastrophe. By the close of Part 2, the apprentice had not merely endured hazards, they had internalized the very logic of danger. Each fire, chemical spill, slip, or collapse became a lesson in resilience. The bakery, with all its unpredictable perils, was simultaneously a school of craft, psychology, and survival. Escalation was not just a threat, it was the teacher. As the gruesome realities of the bakery became more widely known, whispers turned into open gossip. Streets and marketplaces buzzed with tales of apprentices scarred by burns, poisoned by careless chemicals, or suffocating under heaps of fallen flour. Ordinary citizens, initially oblivious, began to notice the effects on young apprentices: pallid faces, coughing fits, and hunched shoulders. Mothers would cross the street to avoid bakeries, and shopkeepers hesitated to employ children in such dangerous trades. Public perception was a complex mix of fear, fascination, and moral outrage. People marveled at the skill required to produce bread while simultaneously avoiding hazards, yet recoiled at the personal cost to apprentices. Local newspapers occasionally ran stories highlighting the dangers, often with exaggerated or grotesque details to capture readers' attention. Headlines like "Death by Dough, Young Bakers in Peril" were both sensational and partially factual, heightening public anxiety. Rumors and gossip functioned as a social alarm system. Even without formal reporting, the stories reached distant towns, spreading awareness far beyond the immediate community. Citizens debated: were apprentices victims of unavoidable occupational hazards, or were bakers negligent and cruel? Street conversations often reflected a tension between admiration for baking craft and condemnation for unsafe working conditions. Community responses were diverse. Some wealthy patrons advocated for regulations, arguing that apprentices deserved protection. Philanthropic individuals sponsored safer kitchens or provided educational alternatives to dangerous work. Others, however, dismissed the complaints as exaggerated, considering the physical toughness of apprentices a rite of passage. Such debates revealed societal ambivalence. The economic value of bakers conflicted with moral responsibility to protect children. Children themselves became focal points of social concern. Families feared sending their young ones into bakeries where survival depended on constant vigilance and sheer luck. Apprentices' physical scars, often visible, became symbols of both endurance and cruelty, sparking emotional reactions from neighbors and relatives. Stories circulated in schools, marketplaces, and taverns, warning prospective apprentices about the dangers awaiting them. Authorities gradually took notice, though bureaucratic inertia slowed action. Inspections were infrequent, inconsistent, and often superficial. When enforcement occurred, bakers sometimes manipulated rules or staged compliance to avoid penalties. Nevertheless, the combination of public awareness and political pressure planted the seeds for eventual reforms. Economic pressures complicated public reaction. Bread was a staple food, and bakeries were critical to city life. Citizens needed their bread daily, often ignoring the behind-the-scenes horrors, to secure affordable and timely supply. This tension between moral outrage and practical necessity shaped the social narrative surrounding bakers. Families complained, yet still purchased bread from the very establishments they criticized. Cultural representations also emerged. Artists, playwrights, and pamphleteers depicted bakeries as simultaneously terrifying and fascinating. Caricatures portrayed apprentices as frail figures battling monstrous ovens or giant rats, while satirical commentary lampooned bakers as reckless villains. Literature occasionally incorporated these hazards into broader social critiques, illustrating how industrial and domestic life intersected with danger. The combination of gossip, press coverage, and cultural depictions influenced public expectations. Citizens began demanding transparency, accountability, and basic safety measures. While immediate change was slow, social pressure created a climate in which reforms became conceivable. Parents, educators, and philanthropic organizations leveraged social outrage to lobby authorities, arguing that apprentices' survival and well-being were public concerns, not private matters. Even within bakeries, social context affected behavior. Apprentice hierarchies were shaped not only by skill and endurance, but also by reputation. Those who survived or witnessed disasters were treated as authoritative figures, passing down cautionary tales to younger apprentices. Shared experiences of danger fostered solidarity, but also reinforced the terrifying reality. Survival was an achievement recognized socially, not just personally. By the end of Part 1, the public had developed a nuanced perception of the bakery world, a mix of horror, fascination, moral scrutiny, and reluctant acceptance. Citizens were learning to balance daily needs with awareness of human cost, setting the stage for eventual social and legal interventions. As public awareness of the bakery horrors intensified, social pressure mounted for reform. Parents, philanthropists, and even some enlightened bakers began pushing for practical changes to improve apprentice conditions. Town meetings often featured heated debates. On one side, those who demanded immediate safety regulations, and on the other, bakers and guild representatives who argued that strict rules could stifle productivity and increase bread prices. The first tangible reforms were modest. Improved ventilation in baking rooms, stricter supervision of dangerous tools, and basic sanitation standards. Though seemingly minor, these interventions marked a cultural shift. Citizens realized that occupational hazards could be mitigated without sacrificing productivity, and apprentices slowly gained some protection. Schools and charities started offering apprenticeships under safer conditions, creating alternatives to traditional bakeries. Public advocacy played a crucial role. Pamphlets and newspapers exposed the worst abuses, often using shocking anecdotes and illustrations. Titles like "The Hidden Tortures Behind Your Daily Loaf" drew widespread attention. Citizens wrote letters to authorities demanding inspections, organized petitions, and attended council meetings. Such civic engagement was unprecedented, transforming passive gossip into concrete social action. Social norms also evolved. Whereas endurance and suffering were once seen as marks of character, communities began valuing safety, skill, and humane treatment. Families who previously relied on apprenticeships for income increasingly sought safer options. Children were protected from extreme exposure to smoke, heat, and toxic substances, reducing both immediate injuries and long-term health effects. Guilds and professional organizations eventually codified these changes. They introduced mandatory training on safe practices, regulated chemical use, and enforced maximum work hours for apprentices. While compliance was uneven at first, persistent social pressure ensured that more bakers adhered to the new standards. Over time, apprenticeships became less a trial by suffering and more a structured, educational experience. Economic consequences were notable. Improved safety measures slightly increased the cost of bread production, but public support offset potential backlash. Citizens were willing to pay a premium for bread made without exploiting children, reflecting a broader societal shift. Moral responsibility began influencing consumer behavior. The public's role as informed, ethical stakeholders became an enduring force in shaping industry standards. Cultural memory of the era endured. Stories, plays, and visual art immortalized the early days of apprentice suffering and the struggle for reform. Schools included historical accounts of hazardous working conditions as cautionary tales, emphasizing both the human cost and the power of civic engagement. In literature, bakers became symbolic figures, embodiments of both human ingenuity and human negligence, highlighting the tension between production and protection. Public reaction also influenced lawmaking. Municipal authorities codified safety standards, and enforcement mechanisms gradually improved. These legal frameworks provided a model for other trades, demonstrating how public awareness and social advocacy could drive systemic change. The bakery reforms became an early example of occupational safety legislation, influencing industries far beyond baking. By the time the next generation of apprentices entered the trade, the social context had transformed. Apprentices were no longer passive victims. They were part of a system that valued training, health, and human dignity. The public, having witnessed the consequences of neglect, maintained vigilance through inspections, advocacy, and moral scrutiny. This collective consciousness ensured that history's lessons would not be forgotten. Ultimately, the public reaction to bakery hazards illustrates a broader principle. Social awareness and engagement can reshape dangerous practices into safer, ethical systems. From whispered rumors to organized petitions, society demonstrated that ordinary citizens could influence occupational conditions and protect vulnerable populations. The legacy of these actions endures, reminding us that vigilance, advocacy, and empathy are essential components of a just society. The aftermath of public outrage over hazardous baking conditions led to the first formal legislative reforms. Authorities began drafting laws focused on apprentice welfare, workplace safety, and hygiene standards. Though initially met with resistance from guilds and traditional bakers, the mounting evidence of injuries, poisonings, and respiratory diseases left no room for ignorance. These reforms were multi-layered. First, work hours for apprentices were strictly limited, ensuring children were not overworked or exposed to extreme conditions for prolonged periods. Next, chemical handling, particularly alum and other toxic additives, was regulated, and bakers were required to maintain records of their use. Inspections became routine, with penalties for non-compliance ranging from fines to license suspension. Hygiene standards were also improved. Baking rooms were required to have proper ventilation, cleanable surfaces, and designated areas for food storage. Rats and vermin were no longer to be tolerated, and regular pest control became mandatory. These regulations transformed baking from a hazardous trade into a controlled, safer profession. Education played a crucial role in the reforms. Apprentices were taught both baking techniques and safety protocols. Manuals were published, emphasizing hazard awareness, chemical knowledge, and safe handling of ovens and machinery. This marked a cultural shift. Apprentices were no longer treated purely as labor. They were considered students, trainees, and future professionals. Economic pressures shaped the reforms too. While initial compliance increased costs for bakers, public willingness to pay for safer bread helped stabilize the industry. Businesses that adopted reforms early gained reputational benefits, attracting customers who valued ethical production. Over time, these regulations became industry standards, setting a precedent for workplace reform in other trades. The media continued to play a pivotal role. Newspapers and pamphlets chronicled reform progress, praised compliant bakeries, and exposed offenders. Public engagement ensured that reforms were not only written into law but actively enforced. Citizens now held both bakers and authorities accountable, creating a system of checks and balances. In this first part of Section 6, the foundation of modern bakery safety was laid. Laws, education, inspections, and public vigilance combined to prevent the horrors of the past from recurring. Apprentices and workers began to experience dignity, safety, and recognition, transforming the social perception of baking from a perilous necessity to a professional craft. Part 2. Legacy, Modern Parallels and Cultural Memory, 1,000 plus words. The impact of these reforms extended far beyond bakeries. Modern occupational safety standards, labor laws, and apprentice protections in various industries can trace their origins to early bakery reforms. Public insistence on humane treatment of workers created a blueprint for ethical industry practices across trades. Cultural memory immortalized the bakery reform era. Plays, literature, and educational materials depicted the horrors of past practices, the heroism of reformers, and the moral responsibility of citizens. Stories of apprentices enduring smoke-filled rooms or arsenic-laced ingredients became cautionary tales, reminding future generations of the consequences of neglecting safety. Modern bakeries, while technologically advanced, still honor this legacy. Ventilation systems, temperature controls, chemical safety procedures, and rigorous hygiene standards are direct descendants of these 19th century reforms. Apprentices today are trained in structured programs that emphasize both technical skills and workplace safety, reflecting the lessons learned from past disasters. Public consciousness also evolved. Citizens learned that ethical consumer behavior could drive reform. Choosing to support safe and humane businesses became a societal norm, reinforcing the idea that safety, morality, and commerce are interconnected. The bakery reforms were an early demonstration of consumer influence shaping industry standards. The legacy is also visible in labor law frameworks. Maximum work hours, mandatory breaks, apprenticeship education, and occupational health standards across multiple trades echo the principles established in the bakery reforms. The success of public advocacy in this domain inspired similar campaigns in factories, mines, and other high-risk workplaces. Finally, the reforms highlighted the power of collective action. Advocacy, civic engagement, media scrutiny, and persistent social pressure showed that change was possible when ordinary citizens refused to accept injustice. This principle continues to inform modern labor movements, consumer protection campaigns, and public safety initiatives. In summary, the bakery reforms transformed the trade, protected vulnerable workers, and left an enduring legacy in occupational safety, social responsibility, and cultural memory. The horrors of the past were not forgotten. They became the foundation for a safer, more ethical, and conscientious society. As we step back from the grim ovens, smog-choked streets, and the perilous lives of apprentices, it becomes clear that history is never just a collection of dates and names. It is a story of human endurance, folly, and reform. The Victorian baker's world, with its arsenic-laced bread and suffocating apprenticeships, stands as a stark reminder of how industrial ambition and ignorance can collide to create widespread suffering. The lessons of that era are not confined to history books. They ripple through time, teaching us that vigilance, education, and ethical oversight are essential in any profession. By examining the extremes of the past, we gain a lens to evaluate modern workplaces. Are conditions safe? Are workers respected? Are corners cut in ways that might threaten lives? The cultural and social shifts triggered by those historical horrors also show the power of awareness. Public outrage, media coverage, and consumer choices combine to demand accountability from bakers and authorities alike. In modern terms, this is the birth of consumer advocacy and ethical commerce. The citizens of Victorian London, through letters, protests, and persistent complaints, were early pioneers of the idea that ordinary people can reshape entire industries. Reflecting on this period also brings a darkly humorous perspective. Despite the horror, the absurdity of certain practices, like using poisons to whiten bread or forcing children into suffocating dough pits, reminds us that humans often balance creativity with folly. Humor, even when grim, allows us to digest history's harshest lessons without being paralyzed by them. Education remains central. Today's training manuals, safety protocols, and professional standards owe their existence to those who survived and documented these early horrors. The Victorian bakeries, once theatres of danger, became classrooms for societal learning, leaving a legacy that persists in industries worldwide. Part 2. Modern parallels and takeaways. Modern workplaces, from factories to offices, echo the struggles and reforms of Victorian bakeries. Safety regulations, labour protections, chemical handling protocols, and apprenticeship programs are all rooted in historical lessons. When workers are trained, informed, and respected, both productivity and morale rise, a principle painfully learned through centuries of trial and error. Consumer responsibility continues to be critical. Just as Victorian citizens demanded ethical bread, modern buyers influence industries through choices and scrutiny. From organic food labelling to ethical labour certification, the principle remains the same. Public engagement drives reform. Innovation, too, is a key takeaway. The same drive that once led bakers to experiment with dangerous additives now fuels safe technological progress. Modern ovens, ingredient substitutes, and industrial hygiene techniques demonstrate that innovation need not compromise safety, a direct counterpoint to the missteps of the past. Yet, perhaps the most enduring lesson is vigilance. Systems, laws, and reforms can prevent disaster, but only if they are maintained and updated. Human negligence, greed, or complacency can always recreate old dangers in new forms. History, then, is a warning as much as a guide. As we close, consider the apprentices, the bakers, and the citizens of that perilous era. Their struggles, humour, ingenuity, and courage shaped the world we inhabit today. Every loaf of bread made safely, every worker protected by law, and every consumer empowered to demand ethics is a small tribute to their legacy. Finally, let this story remind us that even the darkest past can be transformed into meaningful progress. The horrors of Victorian baking were not the end. They were the beginning of a society that values safety, ethics, and human dignity. As we navigate the modern world, may we remember these lessons. History is not just behind us. It lives in every decision we make, every workplace we shape, and every community we protect. The world of Victorian bakers may seem like a distant, almost surreal chapter in history, but its cultural reverberations are profound. Extending far beyond the ovens and alleys of 19th century London, the practices, horrors, and reforms of that era did more than merely shape bread production. They left an indelible mark on societal attitudes, labour laws, consumer consciousness, and even modern culture. By examining these ripples, one can appreciate how seemingly niche historical episodes illuminate broader lessons about ethics, industry, and human behaviour. Victorian bakeries existed at a peculiar intersection of necessity and spectacle. Bread, the staple of everyday life, was also a symbol of wealth, social status, and survival. As such, the failings of bakers, ranging from the use of alum and arsenic to the exploitation of apprentices, transcended mere occupational missteps. They became public scandals, deeply embedded in cultural consciousness. Newspapers of the era did not merely report on these incidents. They sensationalized them. Headlines screamed about poisoned loaves, suffocating apprentices, and fires that consumed entire bakeries, captivating the public imagination. These stories, though grim, became part of collective folklore, feeding cautionary tales that would influence generations. Art and literature of the Victorian period frequently reflected the darker aspects of urban life, and bakeries, as centres of both sustenance and peril, found their way into fictional works. Authors and playwrights often used them as symbols of industrial excess, human greed, and the dangers of unregulated labour. In painting and illustration, depictions of crowded kitchens, soot-covered walls, and frantic workers reinforced the grim reality that lurked behind the romanticised vision of the city. Through these cultural representations, the public internalised a dual lesson. Respect for labour and awareness of systemic hazards were essential for societal well-being. Perhaps the most enduring cultural impact was the evolution of public expectations. The horrors of Victorian bakeries, widely publicised, cultivated a sense of moral responsibility in the consumer base. Citizens learned that their choices mattered, that demanding safe food and humane treatment of workers was not merely idealistic, but necessary. This early form of consumer advocacy laid the groundwork for modern ethical consumption. Today, the echoes of that era are visible in organic certification labels, fair trade products, and even social media campaigns against unethical labour practices. The principle remains consistent. Informed consumers can influence corporate behaviour and catalyse reform. The apprenticeship system, notorious for its cruelty, also left lasting cultural imprints. Tales of children forced to knead dough for hours, suffocating under flour dust, or performing dangerous tasks with no protection were horrifying, yet they highlighted a larger societal problem. Over time, these narratives inspired reformers to advocate for childhood education, labour regulations, and protective legislation. Modern parallels are striking. While industrial apprentices today may face rigorous training, health and safety regulations ensure that the extremes of Victorian suffering are not repeated. Yet, the underlying lesson persists. Society must vigilantly protect those in vulnerable positions. The technological dimension of the cultural impact is also significant. Victorian baking methods, primitive by today's standards, catalysed innovation precisely because of their hazards. Ovens that could incinerate workers, ingredients that endangered health, and labour systems that were unsustainable forced both scientific inquiry and industrial reform. The drive to improve efficiency while ensuring safety remains central to modern industry. Contemporary baking equipment, mechanised kitchens, and automated monitoring systems are direct descendants of these early lessons. Every sensor that prevents overheating, every regulation limiting toxic additives, and every ergonomic workstation reflects the cultural imprint of necessity-driven innovation. Media and storytelling continued to shape perception long after the original bakery scandals had faded. Newspapers evolved into investigative platforms. Novels incorporated industrial critiques, and later, film and television dramatized workplace hazards. By dramatizing the tension between human ambition and ethical lapses, these stories entrenched an understanding of industrial responsibility within popular culture. Audiences learned to view food production, labor conditions, and corporate behavior critically, a perspective that remains vital in contemporary discourse. Furthermore, the Victorian bakery phenomenon contributed to broader discussions about urban planning and public health. Dense city living, smog, and overcrowded kitchens created fertile conditions for disease, fire, and industrial accidents. Cultural narratives, both journalistic and fictional, emphasize the consequences of neglecting infrastructure and human welfare. Today, modern building codes, fire regulations, and occupational health standards owe part of their lineage to these early lessons. The cultural lesson is clear. Awareness of environmental and societal factors is as important as individual diligence. In contemporary society, parallels abound. Consider the global food industry, where scandals related to contamination, unsafe labor practices, or unethical sourcing still capture headlines. The public reaction mirrors Victorian outrage, media exposure, consumer backlash, and calls for regulatory reform often follow. The difference lies in the mechanisms and speed. Digital communication allows near instantaneous dissemination, amplifying cultural impact. However, the principle remains unchanged. Society holds industries accountable through awareness, engagement, and collective action. Education and ethical discourse also reflect the legacy of Victorian baking. Modern curricula in history, sociology, and industrial design often include case studies of industrial hazards, worker exploitation, and public response. By analyzing these historical examples, students learn not only technical skills, but also moral reasoning. They understand that progress is inseparable from human responsibility, and that vigilance against unethical practices is an ongoing obligation. This integration into education ensures that the cultural impact extends across generations, embedding awareness and empathy in professional and personal contexts. The influence also permeates literature and art, continuing to shape cultural memory. Modern novels, documentaries, and exhibitions explore the tension between necessity and morality, labor and exploitation, innovation and risk. Museums and historical sites preserve the stories of bakeries, apprentices, and reformers, enabling immersive experiences that bridge past and present. Through these channels, society internalizes lessons about human behavior, industrial accountability, and ethical consumption. The narrative of Victorian baking becomes more than history. It becomes a tool for cultural reflection and moral guidance. Finally, the cultural impact manifests in everyday behaviors. Choices as mundane as selecting bread in a supermarket or evaluating a company's labor practices carry echoes of Victorian lessons. Awareness of origin, production methods, and ethical standards is now part of the cultural fabric. Social norms regarding workplace safety, consumer rights, and industrial transparency have roots in the struggles, horrors, and reforms of those bakeries. The past informs the present, shaping values, expectations, and responsibilities in ways both subtle and profound. In conclusion, the Victorian bakeries were more than historical curiosities. They were catalysts for cultural transformation. Through literature, journalism, public advocacy, technological innovation, and education, the experiences of that era shaped societal norms, ethical standards, and modern industrial practices. The lessons about labor, consumer responsibility, innovation, and public engagement resonate strongly today, demonstrating that culture is both reflective and instructive. By understanding this lineage, we not only honor the struggles of the past, but also empower ourselves to make ethical, informed choices in the present. The story of Victorian baking is thus a bridge between history and modernity, illustrating how cultural awareness emerges from adversity, how ethics evolve from experience, and how collective memory guides societal progress. It reminds us that every loaf, every worker, and every regulatory reform carries the weight of historical lessons, ensuring that the horrors of the past inform a safer, more conscientious future. And so, we reach the end of our journey through the curious, crusty, and quietly horrifying world of Victorian bakers. From suffocating apprentices to ovens that could incinerate a man, from toxic ingredients to public outrage and sweeping reforms, the story is both grotesque and fascinating. But beyond the shock and dark humour, there lies a deeper lesson. The past shapes the present, and every decision, whether by baker, consumer, or legislator, has ripple effects that echo through time. Today, when we pick up a loaf of bread, swipe through news about labour practices, or consider the ethics of our daily choices, we are, in some small way, connected to those smoky kitchens of the 1800s. The horrors endured, the reforms enacted, and the cultural reflections created a blueprint for modern responsibility, awareness, and humanity. So, next time you enjoy a slice of bread, or marvel at modern safety standards, remember the lessons of history. Vigilance, curiosity, and compassion matter, and in that, the legacy of Victorian bakers endures, a strange, darkly humorous reminder that even the most ordinary parts of life, like bread, can carry extraordinary stories.